I've been making my indie game Cosmic Pebble for more than 6 years now, and my plan was to release it on March or April of 2024. But now it's July, and the game is still not out because I realized that, surprise, surprise, the game was nowhere near the level of fun or polish I was striving for. With the launch right around the corner on the 24th of July, is the game finally ready, and what have I been doing the past 6 months to fix it? Why haven't I uploaded a proper video since last year? I haven't uploaded a proper video since last year? So I talked a little bit about why I haven't uploaded for so long on the speedrun competition video, but the TLDR is I kept focusing on the game itself, and to be honest, I wasn't too enthusiastic about making videos in general. Well, fast forward like 6 months, and look at that, the game releases in like a couple weeks. Now you may be thinking, bro, wasn't the game almost finished? That's what I thought too, bro. Unfortunately, it also had a lot of problems that I didn't even realize it had. So instead of spending 2 to 3 months just polishing the game and then releasing, I had to sit down and try to actually make the game fun for people, not just me. As a reminder, the game is a 2D platformer set on an alien planet which you traverse with your double jump and your trusty boomerang, and it also has an emotional story about disability sprinkled on top as well. Basically, just what you need after everything you've been going through, isn't that right, big boy? So, let's go over what I've been doing for the past 6 months. First thing I did is rework the UI for the game. I like UI about as much as I like dusting my bookshelves, but the old one was junk and buggy and it didn't even work for most resolutions, so a cleanup was due. Almost everything in the pause menu was crammed into a single screen, which also made it incredibly hard and tedious to expand it. And here's the new one, way more organized. These new menus can also be navigated properly with controller, which is very important. You know, UI is one of those things that shouldn't in theory be important for a game to be good, but I gotta say, I find that UI is a really good indicator of how polished the game ends up being. A bit more exciting than UI, I also added optional story dialogue to the game. These were actually very fun to write, since they actually allowed me to enrich some of the characters and have them interact in interesting ways that aren't always possible while the main plot is progressing. Honestly, some of these are my favorite chunks of dialogue in the entire game, since they really did serve as a way to add some extra humor to a story that gets pretty serious by the end. Even though the game only has 10 levels, albeit large levels, if you've ever made a game that leans a lot into level design, you know that these levels go through a lot of iterations. And it'll never stop, it's insanity. Every time I playtest, I end up with 2 entire sheets of paper with changes I want to make. So you better believe that during these 6 months, the entirety of the game has been tweaked. And not everything was small adjustments either. I decided to take the 2 levels I considered the least fun in the game and essentially rework them from the ground up. And the main goal of the reworks was to make the mechanics more intuitive, but also more fun to use in general. Honestly, I'd love to go into more detail, but that would just be a whole video in and of itself, so you'll just have to take my word that the new levels are better. They are better, right? They're better, right? There are also bosses in the game, and while I feel they are some of the highlights of the game, they were too hard and to a lot of players they felt unfair, so I also tried my best to make them better. And this was pretty tricky to get right because bosses play completely differently than everything else in the game. I generally made sure that players could actually react to all the attacks and that the difficulty curve between bosses was also a bit smoother. A lot of people were also asking for a boss health bar, but I felt that would ruin a little bit of the tension of the boss, so instead I went with the middle ground solution, which I actually really like. So now, whenever the boss reaches a new phase, it gets stunned, and some hearts are shown on top of the boss, which roughly indicate to the player where they're at in the boss fight. So this still keeps the tension of not knowing exactly how many hits you need to reach the next phase, but also it doesn't leave the player completely in the dark. So, you know, game design is fun. If you've watched this far into the video and you haven't wishlisted the game already, it would mean a lot to me if you could. We're close to 1k wishlists, and as promised in the previous video, if we hit that, I'll be eating a loaf of bread. Very exciting stuff, guys, so better wishlist the game, right? Thank you. Now back to the video. You know what wasn't fun though? Playing the game. with a controller. For context, the game was initially built with keyboard and mouse in mind, since you could use the mouse to aim your boomerang and simultaneously move with the keyboard. This meant that you had to multitask and both move and shoot at the same time, but in a precision platformer, which felt pretty unique. So on controller, what you had to do was use the right stick to aim, but this meant that you had to slide your thumb from the jump button to the right stick, then shoot, and then quickly slide it back. Whoop-de-doop, turns out this was way too involved for like everybody other than me apparently. So after following some helpful suggestions, I decided to make it so that you can aim with the D-pad or the left stick, basically the same way that the player moves. Now this sounds horrible on paper, and when I first heard it, it also sounded terrible to me, but thanks to some aim assist, you only really need to think about aiming straight upwards or downwards, and the rest kinda takes care of itself. This does make controller way easier than mouse and keyboard, and it does stray away from my initial vision for the gameplay a little bit, but I decided that that was a sacrifice I unfortunately had to make in order to make the game playable on controller. I mean, it's a platformer. Most people will want to play it with controller. I would want to play it with controller, and making the game suck on controller just feels wrong, you know? And hey, on 100,000 sales, I'll also add the Power Glove support to the game. Speaking of support, I also added assist settings to the game. Originally, I wasn't planning on adding assists because I thought the only people that will ever try my game are people that are already into platformers, so they'll be good, so there's no reason to add assists, right? Well, times have changed. The game used to not have a story, but now the story is a very big part of the game, and it may even be its most memorable component. There is now legitimately something to enjoy in the game alongside its gameplay, and hey, the game is hard. Too hard for some people. Why not make the game more accessible to people that don't play platformers, or people that just wanna chill and enjoy the story instead of, you know, dying every 2 seconds. So now, when you start the game, you can choose between one of two modes, challenging or simple. One is for players experienced in the genre that want a challenge, and the other is for more casual players that want to focus more on the story. And I've tried my best to make both modes good, so simple doesn't break the game by giving you extra double jumps or invincibility, it just makes some of the game's mechanics more forgiving. For example, you get a handy slow-mo whenever you aim with your boomerang, which does make aiming very easy, but it also feels really cool, so I think it kinda balances itself out. And of course, you can further customize the settings beyond the two base modes. You can even become invincible or make yourself fly if you really want to. No collectibles if you do that though, that would be a tad much. In my experience playing games, I've found that I always stray away from things like assist options, but I hope that in my game they won't feel like cheat codes but like a genuinely different way to enjoy the game. So if you watched the previous video and thought this game looks too hard for me but I would be interested in the story, I really think the game right now does have something for almost everyone. And finally, the game has been polished. A lot. There is now an indicator showing if you have your double jump or not, character portraits have been updated, and especially the one for Sophia the astronaut. Although I've heard some people prefer the old design, I mean, come on man. You gotta agree at least that the perspectives on the old one were just absolute garbage. I also updated the game's visuals a little bit, and now all the levels have some background tiling and lots of decorations all over the place, which adds a lot of visual variety to the game, surprisingly. It really is crazy how these small additions make the game feel so much more handcrafted and alive. Also, shaders. Now the backgrounds shift color and the stars flicker. Ooh, subtle but cool. Also, gears. Gears are nice, and the people on Reddit seem to really like them. Lamau. Again, I'm mostly a programmer, and these changes certainly don't make the game gorgeous by any means, but hey, I do think it's a definite improvement. And final cool thing, here's the trophy room I was talking about in the previous video. This is where I've put the names of the community members that won some of the events that we've held in the past. And who knows, maybe one day we'll be seeing your name on a shiny trophy. As I'm writing this script, the game will launch in about 3 weeks. But I'll also be leaving for close to a week for vacation, and I'll return literally a week before the game launches. And that basically leaves only a little room for some marketing, and that's about it. I'm essentially done with the game itself before a release other than some bug fixes. I don't think I've yet processed the fact that a 6-year-long project will finally come to an end, but maybe it's no big deal at all and the launch will just be another Wednesday. I think the game itself is in an alright spot, probably as good as it can get without me adding more content. It's not perfect and there are a ton of things I'd like to add, but I just can't either because of time or budget. I'd like to translate the game to more languages, have better controller support, export to more than just Windows, and of course add more content, mainly endgame content. But I have drawn the content line for quite a long while now. I'll try to keep updating the game after it launches, especially if it does well, but I can't make too many promises. There are also other things on the horizon other than just game development, you know. When I started making the game, I was still in school, I didn't know how to code well, I had zero expectations, and I just did it as a hobby for the laughs and giggles while, forcing my friends to play it. At the time, I was seeing a lot of other game developers quit projects midway through, and I had just abandoned my own first project, so I decided, you know what, let's just commit to releasing this game on Steam one day. That was the only goal. And you know what? I will hit that goal. At the same time, I now realize that committing so hard to a project is not a very good idea. A lot of things can change over such a long stretch of time, including yourself. And I now know that a game like mine is not very marketable because of its style and genre. That's just what happens when you don't do market research, you know? So, I don't know how many people will end up playing the game, but I hope that the people that do end up playing it enjoy their time with it. In the end, and this might sound weird, but I think the most important thing is that I myself am happy with it, and hopefully that means that other people will resonate with it as well. I guess the only thing left to do really is launch and see what happens. Hopefully I'll be seeing you on the release as well. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.